today we look inside the MCC Compact grants where the US government don't agree for G Saloon we now $480 million, while the Millennium Challenge Corporation now an independent US government agency where they work with poor country them around the world for help reduce pass mark poor now then country then they and also help economic growth. Inside 2020 the MCC board been pick Saloon for Compact where they don't develop over the past year them. And last month, the president, Julius Madabio, and government officials them been signed the compact grant of $480 million, and this now for supports the energy sector. But waiting next after we then be done sign this compact, make we get the U.S. ambassador na Salon, we na the U.S. representative. Now the country for can tell with the U.S. position as to waiting next before Salon begin benefit from this compact. Once again, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
From that background, I hope you a little bit understood what I
yes,
said
I
in Creole.
understand Creole at
so
this
you
point.
talk Creole now?
I don't speak it, but I can understand it when it's spoken.
Okay, since 2020, Sierra Leone has been working on the compact grants, which has been granted. And
Yes.
The U.S. government, the MCC board, and also the U.S. Congress also played a part in this. What's the feeling at this moment that this compact has been signed?
Well, I think from the U.S. government side, we're very pleased that we've been able to reach this point in the negotiations with the Sierra Leonean government. We've believed for a long time that the MCC would benefit immensely the people of Sierra Leone and set forth the transformation of the energy sector, making it truly accessible to all Sierra Leoneans and setting the stage for greater private sector growth. So the fact that we've reached the point where the compact has been signed and where we can now begin working on implementation for the U.S. government is a very positive development.
Looking at Sierra Leone's story with the compact developments, they started implementing the threshold, the MCC threshold, which was granted in 2015, after which the compact Sierra Leone was selected for compact or as eligible country. Why is it that you choose Sierra Leone for compact?
So the MCC is designed to look at countries objectively, compare them with other developing countries, and offer assistance to those which are moving forward on a range of very specific indicators. So the indicators that we look at are really investing in people, ruling justly, and controlling corruption. So every year the MCC does an evaluation of all potentially eligible developing countries and determines how they are ranking on those criteria. And if a country scores highly enough on the MCC scorecard, the board then considers whether or not to offer a compact to that country. They take into account the scorecard as well as other indicators of whether a country is moving in the direction that would allow an MCC investment in development to have a meaningful impact. In Sierra Leone's case, Sierra Leone did not originally pass the MCC scorecard. So what the board decided to do was to initiate the threshold program that you mentioned, which was designed to help Sierra Leone improve on the various indicators that MCC looks at. And thanks to the, I think, leadership of successive governments, the involvement of the opposition, the involvement of civil society, we've been able to see Sierra Leone's scorecard continue to improve over time, ultimately to reach a point where they passed it for multiple years, and that's why the MCC board elected ultimately to offer a compact to Sierra Leone.
All right, now finally Sierra Leone has signed this particular compact. Now, question around this funding is that who determined the areas this funding should be used?
So the Millennium Challenge Corporation worked very closely with the Compact Development Unit in the Office of the Vice President here in Sierra Leone. They looked at a number of different studies to determine what area would have the greatest impact in reducing poverty and stimulating economic growth, which are the two primary goals of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And at the end of the day, they discussed various options with the Compact Development Unit and the Office of the Vice President, And it was ultimately the cabinet of Sierra Leone that made the determination that, based upon the studies that were available, investing in the energy sector, investing all of the money in the energy sector, made the most sense. And that was something that, based upon the data, the Millennium Challenge Corporation was able to support.
All right. So, do you satisfy with the areas that government choose to support the light system?
Yeah, very much so. If we had disagreed on the compact, we would still be in negotiations with the government over exactly what was in there. The fact that we were able to conclude negotiations in July indicates that both the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the government were in agreement as to what projects should be pursued.
The threshold was on energy or reforms in the energy sector and also the water sector. Looking at the reforms in the energy sector, where the threshold was concentrated on, how can you describe that from your own standpoints?
So they made progress, and you can see in the indicators that they made progress, but it did not go far enough, and it was never intended to address all of the problems of the energy sector. It was intended to make sustained improvement so that the government could show that it was meeting the investing in people indicators. Where we are currently is that there are a number of reform elements that the government will need to address prior to the construction phase of the MCC beginning. They have agreed to those. They are enumerated in the compact. They can be read online by anyone who is interested. But there are a series of outstanding reforms that will still need to be undertaken.
The grant is $480 million. How is that determined?
So the Millennium Challenge Corporation, when it offered the compact to the government, gave them the upper limit of what the U.S. government funding for the compact could be. The government then decided it was going to add a very small amount of Sierra Leonean government resources to the compact and have that administered as part of it, and that's how we arrive at the $480 million threshold.
So when actually this project will start off in Sierra Leone?
So the project implementation begins now. The next step is, of course, for the Parliament of Sierra Leone to ratify the compact and adopt whatever legislation is necessary to set up what's called the Millennium Challenge Authority, which will be the local body that ultimately oversees the compact implementation. We're then allowed to begin spending a very small amount of the compact funds in what's called the pre-implementation phase, which will look at helping the government achieve some of the reforms that we've already talked about that it needs to do in the energy sector. It will allow us to begin some of the pre-feasibility work on the projects that needs to be done, environmental impact studies, engineering studies, design studies, and it will give the government time to meet the other requirements that it has to in order for the compact to come into effect. Once the government has met all of the preconditions, we will enter the compact into force, and that's when the bulk of the construction work will begin on the transmission and generation networks, and the bulk of the assistance will be provided on the long-term reforms of the power sector and encouragement for private sector investment.
All right, who will be in charge of this funding?
So the funds are retained by the U.S. government. The funds are not transferred to the Sierra Leonean government.
Why? Why not Sierra Leone government instead of the U.S. government?
Because that's how the Millennium Challenge Corporation is set up globally. The way that the Millennium Challenge Corporation works is that the U.S. government retains the funding. We disperse that funding directly to the contractors that are carrying out the work on behalf of the Millennium Challenge Authority. Where the Sierra Leonean government becomes involved is through its membership in the MCA, which ultimately is the authority that directs compact implementation and will handle all of the contracting decisions that need to be made for implementation of the project. And that MCA is a collection of the U.S. government, the Sierra Leonean government, representatives from civil society, and representatives from the private sector.
All right. Are you scared of government officials? That's why you are not giving the money to them?
No, this has nothing to do with Sierra Leone. This is simply...
No, I mean globally.
Globally, well, the Congress of the United States set up how the Millennium Challenge Corporation was to function, and they made the determination as to the rules under which it disperses its funds.
And you mentioned that there are preconditions before the fund could be granted for full implementation. What are these preconditions?
So they fall into three areas. There are what I will call the legal conditions, which involve the need for the government to have the agreement ratified by Parliament, certify that ratification, and the two sides to exchange various notes saying that they have completed their internal ratification of the agreement. The second part of it has to do with the specific prerequisites that are found in Article 7 of the Compact that deal with reform of the power sector. So there's a number of things that the government has agreed to do as preconditions to receiving the full MCC grant. All of those are specific, again, to the power sector management itself. The third area is a statutory requirement from our Congress that says that countries that are receiving MCC funding have to continue to meet the scorecard eligibility requirements throughout the life of the project. So at the time we determine when to bring this compact into force, we will need to see that Sierra Leone is still meeting those eligibility requirements. And for Sierra Leone specifically, the ruling justly indicator has been the one that has been most problematic in the recent past, and therefore, in order for that indicator to continue to score where it needs to, we will need to see the full implementation of the Agreement for National Unity and the implementation of the recommendations from the Tripartite Committee's final report on election reforms.
You made mention that the preconditions are categorized into three broad areas, which has to do with the legal, that Parliament has to approve, and also the statutory, which is Sierra Leone meeting the scorecard, and also the ruling justly, which is democracy and good governance. Let me take you into the area of the scorecard. How is that going to be done when the compact is being developed or when it is underway?
So we do the scorecard on an annual basis. We will continue to do that as we've done for the last several years. That data is gathered from a number of publicly available sources. It is collated, and then the scorecard presented on an annual basis to the government of Sierra Leone. So we will continue to undergo that process. We will also continue, as I said, to monitor very closely whether or not the government has implemented in full the Agreement for National Unity and the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee.
Now, Sierra Leone has been passing the conditions or the scorecard. In a situation during implementation, Sierra Leone doesn't pass. What would happen to the compact grants?
So, if Sierra Leone were to fall behind, we would look at various mechanisms depending on how severe the fall behind was that we could bring into place, and that could include everything up to and including the suspension of the compact itself.
All right, you mentioned about contractors. So in terms of bidding, awarding contracts to contractors, who will handle that particular aspect?
So the Millennium Challenge Authority will be responsible for handling the contracting relating towards implementation.
All right, but do you consider our local contractors, because we have a law in the Local Content Act that you give priority to Sierra Leonean, which have the qualify, to carry out their work?
So certainly we hope that many of the companies involved will be Sierra Leonean, but that will very much depend upon whether Sierra Leonean companies have the capacity to be able to carry out what is some very technical work in the energy sector. It's early days. We haven't gone through any rounds of bidding yet or put any contracts on the street, so I really can't say whether or not they'll be able to meet those pre-eligibility requirements. We just don't know. We'll have to see.
Continue to stay with us, and earlier you mentioned the preconditions, the legal, the statutory. We are coming to ruling justly, which has to do with the implementation of the tripartite recommendations, which are 80 of them. We shall look at that when we come back to you. Continue to stay with us in the program. Bryan David Hunt, U.S. Ambassador to Salone Day. Inside the program, they talk about the MCC Compact Grant. And Ambassador, before we went for that break, we are talking about the preconditions. You mentioned the legal, the statutory, and ruling justly. Under the ruling justly, you've emphasized on several occasions about the recommendations or the implementation of the Tripartite Committee. How does this work, and what would be the impact of this recommendation on the grants?
So the Tripartite Committee, from our perspective, and from the perspective not just of the United States but the international community, has done some tremendous work in really looking at Sierra Leone's election system and answering what has been a persistent question from the international partners about why it seems to be we have the same problems appear every electoral cycle. And what the Tripartite Committee found, as it was requested to do by the signatories to the Agreement for National Unity, was that there are a number of legal and regulatory deficiencies in how Sierra Leone's election systems are structured, which lead to the persistent problems that we've seen going all the way back to the first post-war elections. So from our perspective, the best thing that can happen at this stage is for the government to take very seriously the recommendations that have been put forward by the Tripartite Committee and bring those into Sierra Leone's legal and regulatory framework.
There are 80 recommendations from the Tripartite reports. Should all be implemented before the fund be granted, or it should go simultaneously?
So we have said very clearly that we expect to see the full implementation of those 80 recommendations. We will see what the timeline is that is ultimately laid out for that to be done, but I would anticipate that those 80 recommendations can and should be implemented relatively quickly. And my government's view is that we would anticipate seeing the vast majority of those implemented long before we're talking about entry into force of the compact.
If these 80 recommendations is not met, what will be the next step of the U.S. government?
Well, we will not move forward with entry into force of the compact if we don't see the necessary movement and implementation of those 80 recommendations.
Okay, after the election, we have a lot of concern from local and international observers in terms of data of the election. Are you still concerned of the data of the 2023 election?
So our concern is about the electoral process as a whole. 2023 was illustrative of significant problems that date back throughout Sierra Leone's electoral history. The inability of political parties and the broader international community and observer groups to have confidence in the results that are released by the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone is not new. We've had repeated court challenges, we've had repeated reports, not unique to the 2023 elections. So our concern is in making sure that when we have the 2028 elections, we're not in the same position. What we're concerned with is making sure that for 2028, everyone has confidence in that data that is released and that there is the paper trail behind that data to back it up.
Now, the compact implementation is 5 years.
Yes.
Now, you are asking that the 80 recommendations be implemented before the compact grants implementation starts. Where the 5 years starts counting from? From the signing or from the beginning of the implementation?
So 5 years begins from the date the compact enters into force. So the compact will enter into force only after all of the preconditions are met.
5 years is the implementation process? How is it going to be implemented?
So the way in which it's implemented is the Millennium Challenge Authority will determine what contracts need to be let in order for this, for the various categories of work that are delineated in the compact to move forward. They will go through a open, transparent procurement process to select the vendors that will carry out that work. They will then write the contracts with those vendors, which will include the terms under which the vendors carry out the work and the payment to be received for it. And then as the vendors meet the various benchmarks that are laid out in the contract, the vendors will receive their payment checks from the U.S. government for carrying out that work. One of the contracts that will be ultimately let by the Millennium Challenge Authority will deal with the monitoring and oversight of the compact. So there will be a vendor whose responsibility it will be to provide regular reporting back to the MCA, the performance of the others as they carry out their work. And the MCA will be responsible for making sure that those reports are reviewed, the corrective actions are taken, and that at the end of the day, at the end of the 5-year period, all of the various projects that are enumerated in the compact are carried out to the satisfaction of the U.S. and Sierra Leonean governments.
We shall look in detail the implementation plan from the U.S. standpoint, but still the preconditions for granting the fund. There is a message here on our Facebook page from Suleiman Jallo. It says, Mr. Ambassador, should in case the recommendations of both the National Unity and the Tripartite Committee are not met, what will be the next step? Because already there are divergence recommendations in the Tripartite Committee reports. Does the MCC compacts has anything to do with politics? And if implemented, how will they resonate to the daily lives of the ordinary citizens?
Sure. So when we talk about the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee, we are talking about the joint recommendations that both sides agreed to and that were adopted by the Cabinet to move forward with implementation. So it's the joint recommendations, the 84 that you've been referencing, that we're going to be looking to see implementation of. In terms of the MCC compact's impact on domestic politics, no, the U.S. government does not interfere in domestic electoral politics. Our concern is not about who is in power. Our concern is about working with the Sierra Leonean people to establish democratic institutions that allow them to make that choice about who fundamentally is in power in the country. So MCC will not get involved in the domestic politics of Sierra Leone in any way, nor would any part of the U.S. government become involved in your domestic politics. That's for the Sierra Leonean people. As far as how implementation will benefit the Sierra Leonean people, at the end of the MCC compact, we are confident that we will see the vast majority of Sierra Leoneans having access to reliable electricity. That means people will be able to have confidence that they will have the light and the power that they need to run their businesses, to study, to make sure their appliances at home work properly. It will allow for better investment from the international community and hopefully stimulate domestic investment, because power will be reliable and power will be cheaper than it currently is at the end of this project.
Right. After the election, we understand that you're going to bring to book all those involved in fraud and also violence in the election. Have you seen those institutions and those people?
So, the United States does not get involved in enforcing domestic law in Sierra Leone. Our hope is that the Sierra Leonean government will take the steps to hold accountable those who engaged either in fraud during the election or those who perpetrated violence against the Sierra Leonean people. It's the responsibility of the government to do that. As an international partner, we have consistently encouraged the government and the opposition to make sure that those steps are part and parcel of the recommendations coming out of the Tripartite Committee, and that the Attorney General's office and others are moving forward where appropriate with legal charges against individuals. Certainly the Tripartite Committee makes a number of recommendations that deal with accountability. It talks about the need for an external review of the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, as well as several other electoral management bodies. We look forward to seeing the results of those reviews when they are available, and for the government to take appropriate actions as detailed in those reports.
All right, a text message from our Radio Democracy Facebook page from Abu Sanko. Mr. Ambassador, what the government should finally done to gain this MCC?
So in the end, for the MCC to enter into force, the government's really going to need to focus in two areas. One is on the reform of the power sector and making sure that it moves forward with all of the commitments that it's made in that sector. And then secondly, it's going to need to move forward expeditiously with implementing the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee and with ensuring that the outstanding elements of the Agreement for National Unity are fully implemented.
Now, let's look at the recommendations, the 80 recommendations. You said they should be implemented fully before the full commencement of the compact development in Sierra Leone or implementation. Do you have any specific dates for this?
Well, those are for the government of Sierra Leone to decide. They need to set out their timeline. I understand that the steering committee is working on that. As the U.S. government, we would not want to dictate to Sierra Leone how quickly it should move forward, but entry into force of the compact, as I've said, depends upon this. So my expectation is that the government's going to move quickly on it.
We are part of the Tripartite Committee, the work of the Tripartite Committee, the international community.
Yes, we will.
And now is they've come out 80 recommendations, which you said it is a precondition or a prerequisite for the implementation of the compact. What would be your role in the implementation?
So the United States plans to be very closely involved in supporting the government with the technical aspects of the implementation and supporting the opposition with the technical aspects of the implementation. As we did during the Tripartite Committee, USAID it will be providing support through our implementing partners to the steering committee and to other elements of the government that are carrying out the implementation of the Tripartite Committee recommendations. It's part and parcel of our democracy and governance program, and we consider this to be an incredibly important part of what we're trying to help the Sierra Leonean people achieve.
All right. During the process of the Tripartite Committee, we have concern from the opposition, and also in some cases the opposition, stand down their support. Do you satisfy with the cooperation of both opposition and ruling government during this process?
So the Tripartite Committee was not an easy process, nor did I expect it to be an easy process when you have two parties that had significant differences in their opinions on various matters that were before the committee. There were times when the opposition was unhappy with progress. There was times when the government was unhappy with progress. And both of them vociferously expressed their concern to the international community through the UN resident coordinator, who was our representative to the committee. On a few occasions it boiled up into the public, and you saw the public commentary, but overall I would say that the members of the committee did a very credible job in finding a way forward through some very, very difficult matters. The fact that they were ultimately able to agree on more than 80 joint recommendations is really a testament to the work that went into finding the sensible political compromises that were necessary to really focus on the electoral institutions. And I think that's the value of the Tripartite Committee report. Its process really forced both sides to set aside the politics of the moment and focus on the long term. Look at what's going to transform the election system to the benefit of the Sierra Leonean people. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we received from the committee.
So before we go for that break, you mentioned about the condition to this particular compact. Now, my question is, in any way the opposition have role to play for this compact not to be suspended?
Absolutely. The opposition, first and foremost, is going to need to decide whether or not to support the compact in Parliament. So they have a very significant role there in ratifying the compact, as well as in passing whatever other legislation the government deems is necessary to move the compact forward. They will certainly play a role in many of the power sector reforms that need to be adopted as preconditions to the compact. Some of that requires legislation through the Parliament. Some of it just requires the support of political leaders to help motivate the public to put pressure on the government to make sure those regulatory reforms happen. Third, the opposition has a very key role to play as part of the implementation of the recommendation of the Tripartite Committee and in the Agreement for National Unity. They are the second party to both of those agreements, and we look very much to their continued engagement and leadership and making sure that the government delivers in a way that is transparent, in a way that is inclusive, and in a way that meets the needs for broad institutional reform in the country.
Right. If the opposition fail to, support this process, in any way will hinder the process?
Very much so. If either the government or opposition choose not to engage or choose to block elements of the reform agenda, whether the democratic reform or the reform of the power sector, it would be very problematic, I think, for the country. I don't believe that's going to happen. I've had many long conversations with leadership of both the government and the opposition. Both of them really are committed to making democratic reform happen in this country. So I have no reason to believe that there will be any difficulty in trying to move both the reforms in the democracy and the power side forward to the benefit of the Sierra Leonean people, which fundamentally is the interest of both government and opposition.
Away from the precondition for the granting of the compact grant, let's look at the grant itself. There is a counterpart funding, government counterpart funding. What is that? And why do we need a counterpart funding for a grant?
So governments have the option when they are in negotiation with the MCC to decide to put up additional funds that they would like administered as part of the compact. Some governments choose to do that, some governments choose not to do that, and it's really a choice of the government that we're negotiating with. It is not a requirement of the compact, but it does allow governments to decide that if the amount the U.S. government can provide is not sufficient to meet everything they want to do under the compact, it allows them to put additional resources towards it. And in the case of Sierra Leone, they decided they wanted to put up a small amount of counterpart funding. I think funding they'd already identified as destined for reform of the energy sector because they felt confident that working through the MCA mechanism, those reforms would happen and that money would be well invested.
How much is that amount?
It's a little over $10 million.
$10 million?
Yes.
Now, let's look at how this money has already been partitioned. It has been partitioned, like we have $128 million on distribution and access. You have $50 million on the reform of the power sector. You have $72 million on program administration and control, and also $7 million on monitoring and evaluation. Who does these allocations and how it is being done?
So that's part of the negotiation between the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the government of Sierra Leone. As you know, the finance minister led a delegation in July of government officials to Washington, where they spent several days negotiating with the MCC, and part of that negotiation was around exactly how to allocate the funding across the various projects. The way that it works is the government and MCC first agreed on the projects they wanted to carry out, and then we ran cost estimates on them, and then we apportioned the costs based on those cost estimates.
$7 million on monitoring and evaluation. Who is this money going to, and who is going to monitor?
So it's done by an outside third-party firm that will be contracted by the MCA. We found over many, many years working in the development space that it is best to have an external monitoring and evaluation program, that is the best way to get honest feedback and data about whether your project is successful or not.
Where is the external coming from? From the US or from within
So
Sweden?
it'll be a contract, and folks will bid on it, and the MCA will ultimately make that determination. It's far too early to say who would be the contractor.
$7 million for monitoring and evaluation has been a concern for some Sierra Leoneans. Why that amount allocated to just monitoring and evaluation, for instance?
Well, I think monitoring and evaluation is absolutely a critical part of any development program. The way that figure is arrived at is based upon MCC's considerable experience doing this globally. It's well within the norms of what is spent on monitoring and evaluation for development programs. And without monitoring and evaluation, you have no way to ensure that the project is being carried out appropriately, that the benefits are being received, that the work is being done to an appropriate safety and health standard. So this is money that is absolutely critical, particularly as part of any large engineering project like this.
All right, my colleague just asked you about disbursement of funds, and over the past year, procurement process is very important, and we understand government has been losing a lot of money in that aspect. Who will be in charge of a procurement process?
So under the MCC Compact, the Millennium Challenge Authority, which is a combination of the government of the United States, the government of Sierra Leone, civil society, and the private sector, ultimately has the responsibility for procurement activities, including contracting for the MCC.
All right, a message from a senior citizen which says why the MCC decided to add tripartite disagreement recommendation as one of the criteria to disbursing the grants. The country had already passed the MCC indicators. Criteria only for them now peg disbursement of the grants, which had long been won. This one not too clear, and this other one say, does this not amount to unnecessary bullying and delay, or it is because Sierra Leone is poor? That's why you peg the criteria to the tripartite recommendations.
No, the reason we pegged the criteria to the tripartite recommendations are the serious deficiencies that occurred in the 2023 elections. One cannot expect that any amount of development funding is going to have its desired impact if it is not spent in an environment where there is peace, where there is stability, and where there is movement towards democracy. The 2023 elections, unfortunately, created an environment in which there was significant political disagreement in this country, and showed to the international development partners that there were serious structural issues with the electoral system in Sierra Leone. We could not, in good conscience, as the United States, expend $480 million of our taxpayers' money without seeing that those issues were being substantively and fundamentally addressed. The only way that can happen is if we see the implementation of the Agreement for National Unity, including the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee.
The program, now Good Morning Salon, it come to you from the Society for Radio Democracy 98.1 FM. Member say, yourself can be part of the program. You get concern, comment, or question for the U.S. Ambassador for SECA, the MCC. You can drop them on the number 077-981-981, or go on our Facebook page as we will get it. Anytime for read the messages them and get public opinion on the MCC and views about them. And member say, the ambassador in the program, they talk about the MCC Compact. For continue to stay with us, Ambassador, we are going for a short break. We'll go for a short music break. We'll continue the program. Good morning, Salon.
Another question or concern from senior citizen and local citizen that you guys are involving in our local politics. Is that true?
No. I think we've talked about this already some this morning, but no, the United States does not get involved in your electoral politics. We have no interest as to who is comprising the government of Sierra Leone. That is a choice, always has been a choice, for the Sierra Leonean people. Our interest is to ensure that Sierra Leone, as a signatory to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, is living up to its commitments under those international documents. That includes ensuring that it has an electoral system that guarantees free, fair, and credible elections, and the ability of the Sierra Leonean people to have their voices heard during those elections. So our interests are solely on the institutional side and making sure that the electoral system itself is strong, is functioning as it should, and is in line with international best practices. The politics of the moment are for Sierra Leoneans, not us.
Now, you've made mention of the preconditions for the compact to be granted. After meeting all these conditions, how the fund would be disbursed?
So the funds are dispersed from the United States Treasury directly to those contractors that carry out the work under the compact, and it will be dispersed based upon the terms of the contracts that those contractors sign with the Millennium Challenge Authority.
So the money will not come to Sierra Leone directly?
The money does not move through Sierra Leonean government accounts, no. It will come directly to the contractors here in Sierra Leone that are carrying out the work.
Who determine the contractors and who?
So the Millennium Challenge Authority will ultimately determine the contractors that are selected. Those are done through an open, transparent procurement process that is run by the MCA. The MCA itself comprises the government of the United States, the government of Sierra Leone, and representatives from your civil society and private sector.
If the U.S. companies or the U.S. institutions are implementing the $480 million compact grants, some are saying, or the argument has been that most of the monies are going back to the U.S.
Well, some of these contractors will likely be Sierra Leonean. I don't know that any of them will be from the United States. I can't speak to that, but certainly we anticipate that there are Sierra Leonean firms that will ultimately carry out the work under this compact.
So what about the myth that the money is going back to the U.S.?
So the money doesn't return to the United States. It goes to the individual contractors. Those are selected by the MCA. Ultimately, what the contractors receive are funds that are invested in the electricity grid of Sierra Leone.
All right, we start for look at messages inside the program, and this one said from David Foney, he say, mark my words, this MCC project is not going to be implemented within the time frame of this government. They are using the money to micromanage this government.
This one say every country has a political challenges. So if this is truly a grant, why does it have a political tag?
This one from Abdul Rashid is say, Mr. Ambassador, the people of Sierra Leone are getting tired with the back and forth on the MCC compact. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to Salone what belongs to Salone.
More messages them inside the program. Good morning, Salone. Okay, it's a wow, Radio Democracy made my day with this music and the studio guests in the program.
This one from Alosign Conte say, Mr. Ambassador, do you want to say the U.S. government is not satisfied with the outcome of the elections in Sierra Leone, therefore you are putting restriction on support to government?
We continue for look at more messages. Then this one from Osfred Kama, now Facebook page, say the keyword is compliance and with genuine egos of development.
This one from Bailobai said, this is disgusting. Why this too much condition on this MCC? No election on the earth is free from challenges, not even the US after 62 years of independence. Author no able provide basic needs for Sierra Leonean.
This one from Ibrahim Mukhtar Toure, our Facebook page. They say, I totally agreed with you not to transfer the sum to Salone government.
This one say, you mentioned civil society and other people. What about the media?
Moses Kinney Sharif now Facebook page say so if in terms of bidding and awarding the MCC contract to the contractors, who handles that aspect?
This one from Mystic Dwazaki say the MCC finance should properly manage and implemented so that the electricity challenges in the country will be addressed.
Alaji Mohammed Jan, our Facebook page, they say who will be in charge of procurement during the compact implementation?
This one say please give us the money we need to sort our light issues.
This Alfred Lighter Bangra, they say what are some of the 80 recommendations?
And this other one say what next if finally the tripartite recommendation are not implemented?
More messages them inside the program. Good morning, Salon. We come to you from the Society for Radio Democracy 98.1 FM. We continue for look at the messages them. We not only send on 077-981-981 also on our Facebook page. They say what do you think you have been okay?
This one from Ibra is say, why you guys are rejecting Sierra Leoneans in terms of visa?
They say, what do you think would have been the most appropriate actions to prevent the government from... Okay, this one, it is true that you said there was no money to conduct a rerun of the election as demanded by the APC. What is your opinion on the statement, knowing that provisions are usually made in elections project for a possible runoff if no candidate wins in the first round?
This one from Mansari say money gains we.
We continue for look at more messages, and I come again now with 077-981-981 line. This one, okay, Usman.
Alright, respond to some of the messages, Ambassador Holmes, and we'll come back and with the following.
Of course. So I will try to do this as quickly as I can. So let me begin with the U.S. has no interest in micromanaging the government of Sierra Leone. We have neither the time nor the resources to do that. What we are concerned about is making sure that our $480 million investment can be successful. It can only be successful if there is political stability, forward movement on democracy, and reforms within the power sector. That's why those have been included as part of the MCC preconditions for the compact to enter into force. It is a 5-year timeline. It is a hard 5-year timeline from when the compact enters into force. We have found in numerous developing countries that is sufficient time to carry out even large infrastructure projects like this. So we're very confident that we can, in fact, move this forward within 5 years. The reason why there has been so much back and forth and so many delays in moving the MCC compact forward has been that MCC has very strict statutory conditions that are imposed by our Congress. These are very large grants, and therefore Congress insists a very high degree of confidence in both the democratic trajectory of a country and in its commitment to investing in the development of its people before those can move forward. So we have been in constant negotiations with the government about what it will take to get there. We've arrived at a point where we have broad agreement, and now we move on to the implementation phase. There are no restrictions on U.S. assistance to the government and people of Sierra Leone. We do have concerns about how the electoral system is structured. It's not about the outcome of the election. We don't care who the government of who the people of Sierra Leone choose to vote in or out of office. What we care about is the overall system. So we are working very closely through USAID and others to help the people of Sierra Leone and the government and the opposition reach a point where the electoral system has the full confidence of Sierra Leoneans as well as the international community. Compliance, of course, is absolutely key. That's why we have the monitoring and evaluation criteria, the monitoring and evaluation money set aside. In terms of media, when we talk about civil society in the United States, we consider media to be part of civil society. So when I say civil society, that encompasses not just non-governmental organizations, the way that people talk about them here. It also includes the media, religious organizations, many other groups, essentially anything that is not tied to the government. And I've talked about this before. The contractors, the contracts that are to be awarded, the procurement decisions that are to be made are to be done by the Millennium Challenge Authority, which is a body which is being set up specifically to oversee the MCC project here in Sierra Leone. The MCA will include representatives of the governments of the United States and Sierra Leone, as well as civil society and the private sector. There's no question Sierra Leone has to sort through its power issues. We are very much committed to that. That's why, in addition to the Millennium Challenge Corporation grant, we have already used our Development Finance Corporation to move forward with the Nant Power Generation Project, the Western Area Power Generation Project here in Freetown. It's why we continue to work through Power Africa with the government to put in place other interim solutions to make sure that the power issues begin to be sorted through even before the MCC is fully implemented. In terms of what are the 80 recommendations, I hope that folks can read them online on the Ministry of Information and Civic Education's website. I know that they have put them out there. I will say, just in summary, the 80 recommendations all have to do with reforming the electoral system and making sure that the institutions that are in place function in a transparent manner in which everyone can have credibility on them. If the 80 recommendations are not implemented, what is the future of the MCC? Unfortunately, it's not good. We will not be able to enter into force if we don't see the sustained progress towards the implementation of those 80 recommendations. But again, both government and opposition have been very clear that they want to move these recommendations forward. These are Sierra Leonean recommendations, so I'm quite confident that they will, in fact, ultimately be implemented. Finally, on the question of visas, the United States has very strict conditions to obtain a non-immigrant visa to visit our country. Our Congress has said that every person who applies for a U.S. visa is considered to be intending to immigrate to the United States until they show us otherwise. So that is why conditions are very strict, why people have to demonstrate their intent to come back to Sierra Leone every time they apply for a visa. And because we have had numerous Sierra Leoneans who unfortunately have overstayed their visas in the United States or used their visas in ways that are not consistent with U.S. law, that makes it more difficult for everybody else to be able to prove that they're not immigrants.
Okay. More messages in the program. This one is from Kailaun, Kini Musa in Kailaun. He says, Mr. Ambassador, the last time you visited us in Kailaun Township, of which your visit was very much appreciated, the questions were, how is the compact going to affect Kailaun Township electrification process?
And this other one said, I'm still concerned about the visa process. You guys are denying Sierra Leoneans. Why?
Mark 10 and New Englandville, they say Sierra Leone's eligibility for the compact remains dependent on the country's sustained commitment to advancing democracy, combating corruption, and investing in its people. Sierra Leone will need to continue to meet eligibility benchmarks in these areas throughout the lifetime of the compact, including the full and expeditious implementation of both the Agreement for National Unity and the joint recommendations of the Tripartite Committee. This now from Mark 10 and New Englandville.
This one from Mohammed say, after the election, have you come across the election data?
This one from Gali Daud, now Facebook page, they say it is a good process for the U.S. government to retain the money and disburse funds to project contractors. This should have been all cash from international partners who hold money until conditions met and disbursed to contractors, not government.
This one say, next time our leaders will know how to behave any time of election.
More messages them inside the program. This one say from August 16, 2024, the U.S. Embassy has stopped to renew visas and to secure visas for the first time. When will this blockage be removed? How can we seek appointments now? Thanks.
This other one from Mystic is a Ambassador, the rejection of visa by the consular section is alarming. It will surprise you when 10 Sierra Leoneans meet the criteria, but 2 will be granted a visa. Why?
This one, Sierra Leonean government would have adhered to the Tripartite Committee joint recommendations, which include electoral reforms, upholding of the rule of law and justice, among others, for the sustainability of the grants in the coming years. From Mark 10 again, Nani England V.
This other one say, elect them put any criteria, this money we must eat and ma.
The last one from me from now from Olu Bell. Now we 077981981. I say we are saying thanks for the MCC grants because it is important for the people to get stable electricity. It is only US that cares about us here in Sierra Leone. Please implement these things fast, and please respect our decision when it comes to whom we choose in our election.
The last one I go take from now from Ibrahim Samurai say why someone will suffer for another act. Do not link government problem with ordinary citizen in terms of a visa. These are some of the messages, Ambassador.
Well, let me start with the last one. The government's behavior has no impact upon individual visa decisions. Visa decisions are made based upon an individual's eligibility. So if folks are not deemed eligible for visas, it has nothing to do with the government of Sierra Leone's policies. It has to do with your individual situation in the country. In terms of asking specifics on how the compact will affect Kailao, Kailao is part of the area that will benefit from new transmission and distribution lines through the compact. We should also see new generation capacity coming online that will help ensure that Kailao and the rest of Sierra Leone have much more reliable generation of power going into that. To the question on whether I've found the election data, look, I haven't seen any election data that the rest of the country hasn't seen. Unfortunately, the election data that has been presented does not fundamentally answer the questions that many Sierra Leoneans are asking about how the elections were conducted and what the results were. It is unfortunate that that data does not seem to exist, or has at least not been released and made public to the people of Sierra Leone, but we are where we are, and we need to focus on making sure that in the future that data is available to the Sierra Leonean people, and that's what the institutional reforms do. We've talked already about how the contractor disbursement works. Obviously some people are going to be thrilled by that, other people are not going to be happy by that, but that's simply how the MCC functions, and I will say the government has known this from day one of the negotiations, that's how the MCC operates globally. And whether political actors will know how to behave at the next elections, I think that it is less about individual actors than it is about institutions. And we don't build laws, regulations, and institutions for angels in the political sphere. We build them to prevent those who want to do wrong from being able to do wrong. And that fundamentally is what the reform is about. It's making sure that irrespective of how political actors behave, they will not be able to manipulate the elections to their advantage.
Thank you very much for joining us in today's edition of the program, Ambassador Bryan David Holmes. It has been 1 hour, 30 minutes, insightful and impactful program. And there were a lot of questions about the issue of visa, though we are talking about MCC Compact, and perhaps it would be of essence for the consular units to come out and talk to Australians, because we cannot even read all of the messages. The messages are directed to you with regards to visa, fully knowing that the consular department has to answer some of these questions, because this one is saying, please ask why the lady with the give visa, no, they even look documents, just they reject. I think it would be good for the consular unit of the US Embassy to come out and talk to Australians on some of these decisions. It has been one of the big concerns anytime you are in the studio. But anyway, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. No, I'm sure my consular colleagues would be more than happy to come and talk on Radio Democracy about the visa issue, given the level of interest in it.
Thank you very much for joining us in today's edition of the program. And with regards to the compact implementations, we shall continue reporting on it as we used to be doing it.